Earlier this year, I bought myself this 4Runner. I've had it about 6 months now, and in that time I've driven it all across the United States. I've gone from here in Kentucky up through Maine into Canada. I took it later in the summer from Kentucky out to Utah, Arizona, and I've put about 12,000 miles on it in the 6 months I've owned it, just driving around exploring. And I figured it's about time I did a little review on it. Now, anytime you get a vehicle, there is a compromise. I don't believe there is such thing as a perfect vehicle, and this is definitely not an exception. So if you're a 4Runner fanboy, you probably want to click off and leave because it is not perfect. There are some problems with it. Some of them are small and annoying, some of them are a little bigger, but you know, like I said, it's a compromise, and for me, I really like this vehicle. I do think that it is the right vehicle for me and the right compromise for me. One of the big reasons I switched from the Jeep Grand Cherokee I had before to this is I really wanted something with more storage. This has a ton of storage, and it starts up on the roof. The roof line on this is very long and flat. It's got the ability to have about an 8-foot roof rack. I personally went with the Prinsu roof rack, but you've got a bunch of options and you can't really go wrong with any of them. With my roof rack, I've got enough room for the Smittybilt XL tent, plus an extra foot or so at the front, somewhere where I personally keep traction boards, but you could easily put fuel or other containers up front. Inside is much the same. There's plenty of storage everywhere, and there's a good high roof line, which means you've got plenty of storage in the back and in the seats here. I also have the slide out tray, which means I can load up. I use totes when I'm traveling, so I can load up the totes in the back. I can slide it out and everything's easily accessible. During the summer, I also end up removing the back seats. That gave me a lot of room down to the floor, and I had so much storage in here. I ended up taking stuff for the other two families that we were traveling with. In addition to all the storage space you get stock, there are also some upgrades you can get. I have been looking at the Molly panels that fit in the back windows, and the ones from Rago Fabrication especially seem really cool. You can get ones that have a shelf that goes across the top. You can also get things like the storage attic from Blue Ridge Overland Gear. That's going to be good for things like clothing and bedding. The aftermarket support isn't just limited to storage inside either. You have a ton of options, so many things from loads of different manufacturers. Things like armor, bumpers, lighting, you name it, someone's probably made it. Even the switches that I've got in here, you can get ones that are specially made for the Toyota 4Runner. I think the only vehicle that beats this in terms of aftermarket support is probably the Jeep Wrangler. You've got a slightly better selection and slightly better prices as well. You do have to be prepared to pay a slight premium for the 4Runner aftermarket stuff. Another feature I love about this is the rear window. And I actually didn't realize this was a thing when I was buying it, but there's a button here in the center that when I push it, rolls down the rear window. And this is fantastic for cooler weather, like what's going on now in the fall and the spring. When you're driving along and you roll down that window, there's a really gentle breeze comes through the vehicle. Not like when you roll down the front windows where you get all of the wind in your face. You barely know that's open. I also use the rear window to access things in the back. You know, if the trunk's very dusty, dirty, it's nice just to roll down the window and I can lean in and grab something. If the vehicle's running, I'll just push the button here. If the vehicle's off, I can actually use the key, stick it in, turn it, and roll down the window that way. Really quick and easy. Finally, if you've got a dog, I mean, this vehicle was made for people with dogs. They love the rear window down. My dog will just hang out the back, enjoying the view. Another reason I switched to the 4Runner was for the fuel economy. Now, I know the 4Runner is not known for good fuel economy. You're looking around 17 miles per gallon usually. And when you compare that to a modern vehicle, yeah, that's not great. But when you compare it to the other Overland vehicles that are available, that's really not bad. And especially with my Jeep, I was looking around 10 to 12 miles per gallon. So it is a big improvement. And it was really noticeable this summer when I was out in Colorado, Utah, Arizona. The people I was traveling with, 3 other vehicles. The Wrangler had a range of about 180 miles. The Lexus, the LX470 or Land Cruiser that I was with was getting around 200 miles. And the Tacoma, a little over 200, maybe closer to 250 miles on a tank. Where in this, I was getting 330 miles plus. And it really makes a big difference when you're overlanding. You know, you're out in these remote destinations where the fuel can be hard to find or really, really expensive. And if you're able to get those extra 100 miles, 150 miles, it makes a big difference. I was the only one that didn't have to carry extra fuel and didn't have to worry about fueling up all the time. I did feel like we were stopping at every gas station we passed. This does bring me on to my first complaint. I do feel like this vehicle's a little sluggish. It has the 4-liter V6, and while I'll take the fuel economy over the extra power, some people may not. Some people may really need the V8 for towing or whatever. You just want the extra power for passing. If that's you, then you may want to consider something like the GX 460. Now off the line, I don't think this is too horrible. I really notice it at highway speeds. If you wanted to pass someone or you want to go up a hill, you really have to put your foot down. That's made worse by a large gap in the transmission. I find myself using the manual shifter when I'm on the highway, but I feel as though whoever designed it did it backwards. To change up a gear, when you're going from first to second, you have to push it away from yourself. And I think that's the opposite of what it should be. If you're used to driving a manual car, you'll know that if you change from first to second, in fact, anytime you're changing up, you pull it completely towards yourself. At no point when you're changing up a gear do you push it completely away from yourself. So it's actually the opposite of what it is in, I think, most cars I've driven with a manual shifter. My daily drive is an automatic and it's got the manual shifting mode and it's set up the right way. So I'll find myself changing gear the wrong way in this. And unfortunately, the cruise control in here is defeated by even the smallest of hills. As soon as the vehicle starts struggling, it's going to slow down. So say I set the cruise control to 70, it'll slow down until eventually it reaches about 65, and then suddenly the vehicle will shift down a gear or shift down 2 gears. It'll accelerate up to about 73, 74, and then just repeat the whole process again. It can get kind of annoying when you're on a long haul trip. The only other major complaint I have is with the seats in here. I personally find them kind of uncomfortable, and when I was test driving, I test drove several 4Runners, the Limiteds, so the luxury version, SR5, a couple of trail editions. I also test drove a few GX 460s, and I found the seats in all of them really uncomfortable. They're all really firm, and there's a lot of lumbar support, like sticks out a lot in the lower back. Now this one's not so bad because it has the aftermarket leather seats, which I think make it a lot better. But the funny thing about the seats is, from what I've read online, it's one of those things you either absolutely love them or you hate them. So I think if you go and sit in a 4Runner, you're going to know within about 15 minutes whether or not it's for you. Most people love them. Other than really the power and the seats, I don't have any major complaints about this. There's a few small things like the 12-volt outlet in the back is not always on, so I had to run my own power out there. It is missing a few things, a few luxuries like a remote start, but those really aren't a big deal because it makes up for it with just the overlanding performance of this. Even stock, this vehicle is incredibly capable. I took this out the week after I bought it on stock tires and had a great time. You throw yourself some all-terrains or some mud terrains on here, it's going to be a fantastic vehicle. And actually, I think the stock suspension on this was really comfortable off-road. I did add the lift, which firmed it up, so it's a little less comfortable, but it's still a great off-road vehicle. All of the 4Runners come with A-Track, which is traction control. So when you lift one of the wheels up in the air, rather than letting it spin freely, it applies the brakes to that wheel, which allows the power to go to the other wheel so that you can continue moving. Without it, you'd just be stuck spinning a tire up in the air or stuck spinning 2 tires in the air. I was surprised at how effective it is. I was honestly not expecting it to be as good as it was. Now, if you're looking to do a lot of off-road and overland, you probably want to consider the Trail Edition, the TRD Off-Road, or maybe even the TRD Pro, because they come with some extra electronics and some extra tools. So with the A-Track, up here I have Multi-Terrain Select, which allows me to basically tune the A-Track depending on the terrain I'm on. So on the one end, I can make the A-Track extra responsive. So if I'm rock crawling, as soon as one of those tires starts to spin, it'll apply the brakes and stop it from spinning. And then if I turn it all the way to the other end, that's more for if I'm on a hill climb with mud, or I've got soft sand or loose gravel. That allows the wheels to spin a little more before it applies the brakes. That's especially useful for if you're somewhere muddy, where you want the tires to be able to spin some so that you can clear the tread. I also have an electronic rear locker up here, so push a button, rear locker engages. That's really useful, really effective. The final tool I have in here is crawl control. Now, I'm not a huge fan of crawl control, and I don't think I've ever been in a situation where crawl control has actually helped me out. I can think of some times where it has actually made things worse. With crawl control, it's like an off-road cruise control. It's very, very jerky. You got a little bit of throttle, a little bit of brake going on the whole time. And going up a hill, if it's got a lot of ledges, I think it actually makes things worse because it ends up getting caught up on ledges. And going down a hill, I've seen some times where it's made things worse, especially if you're lifting a tire. I think I'm better off just using a smooth throttle control myself, you know, just putting my foot on the gas. If you disagree with me, if you have had a case where you think crawl control's helped out, let me know. I just personally haven't found it yet. I want to be absolutely clear though, while the 4Runner is great off-road, it's not as good as a Jeep Wrangler, and it never will be as good as a Jeep Wrangler, especially when it comes to rock crawling or anything where you've got an axle twister. It's independent front suspension. It's not going to be as good. And actually, it's not even as good as my old Jeep Grand Cherokee off-road. Where this really has the strength though is just with the overlanding compromise. 99% of what I do, this is better. Maybe even more, this is better. It's better on the highway, it's better on gravel roads, it's better on bumpy dirt roads, it's even better on some of the technical trails. The only time where that Jeep is going to have the advantage is on that like 0.1% of the trails you do where you've got some axle twisters, you've got wheels lifting in the air. In the 10,000 miles I drove this over the summer from here up through Canada and out in Utah, I want to say there was maybe 3 occasions where I would have been better off in a Jeep. That lasted probably about 5 minutes in total. The rest of those miles, this is the better vehicle, and I don't regret buying it at all. I would stick with this. There's no way I'd trade this in for a Jeep. In fact, the only thing I can see myself trading this in for is maybe a newer 4Runner. Finally, I've saved the biggest positive to last, and that is the Toyota reliability. This is going to get far more miles out of it than your average Jeep. Now, I do want to be clear, it's not bulletproof. Anyone who tells you a vehicle is bulletproof is lying to you. You will still have to make repairs, you're going to have regular maintenance, something's going to go wrong. It happens on any vehicle, but it's going to happen less often on this vehicle than it is a lot of other vehicles. Unfortunately, the people who are selling them know that. The dealerships, your private parties, they know that this is the better vehicle in terms of reliability, so you do pay a premium. This cost twice what my Jeep cost, even though it is the same age and a higher mileage. So be prepared to spend a little extra. I personally think it was worth it. Again, like I said, I would go with another one of these before I would any other vehicle. If you found the review of the 4Runner helpful, definitely give it a thumbs up. That will help spread it to more people. It'll show up higher up in the search results. And subscribe to the channel too. That way you can watch more of the videos of this in use. You can see where I've taken it around the country.